Welcome, all you friends, neighbors, family, comrades, all, to another edition of Live from the Heartland. This is going to be number 154 during the time of the pandemic. It's for the week of May 27th. We got a number of wonderful guests, John Anderson and Bob Sarles, both are director and producers of the movie Born in Chicago, a great film about the passing of the torch among blues musicians. And we'll have Coya and Katrina Dion of the Free Street Theater here in Chicago on to talk a little bit. It was a real good week for me. I got to be in the pool a bunch. I got to work on pushing my new book, Crossing Borders. I had a couple of writing sessions with our good friend and sometimes co-host Katie Hogan on the Heartland Cafe book. Many of you who listen or watch this show regularly know that before the Heartland Cafe, where we used to do this show up on the stage, at the studio, and now at home during the pandemic, I had been involved with a group called Rising Up Angry. It was part of an alliance, a rainbow coalition with the Young Lords, the Black Panther Party, the Young Patriots, American Indian Movement. We were all around doing stuff then. I basically met with a whole bunch of early Rising Up Angry people, and we've got a gathering in the planning stages for October 2023. So stay tuned. There'll be more of that. In the in memoriam front, the great athlete Jim Brown, one of the greatest multi-sport athletes of all time, excelling in both football and lacrosse, he passed away. I remember being at an NFL Players Association meeting in Tucson, and there was a party, and the guy next to me dancing his ass off just like I was Jim Brown. He was quite an athlete. And one thing I learned, you know, there's a famous picture of a number of famed Black athletes with Muhammad Ali. Jim Brown called that meeting, and it's been touted and presented as support for Ali, but it turned out that originally it was to try to get him to acquiesce to the U.S. government around the draft. But he stood up to all these brothers, and they ended up supporting him. So that's a little bit of history I didn't know all about. Take note of this. The Illinois Attorney General, Kwame Ruel, he released a scathing report saying that the Catholic clerics have abused hundreds more children than has been previously reported. That's from the New York Times or anywhere you want to get it. A lot of news. And then this morning I was reading Axios, the local version with Monica Eng and Justin Kaufman, and they had a little piece called Who's on the Outs with Johnson, the new mayor, Brandon Johnson. The intrigue. Last week, the Johnson administration released a list of chairs for the various council committees, despite the previous council having voted in March to be independent and choose their own committee chairs. They report that because a huge swath of that council is no longer seated after the election, this administration and the new council appear to be ignoring the independents' vote. Scott Wagesback of the 32nd Ward, once a real progressive guy and the architect of the independence of the council, was abruptly stripped of his Finance Committee duties, replaced by Alderman Pat Dowell. Of note, Johnson didn't respond to Axios' request for comment, and we'll keep you posted. I mean, remember, Wagesback was a plucky newcomer who pushed back on then Mayor Richard Daley's parking meter deal. Just for that, he should be remembered and honored. Another bad thing, it was great to have an inauguration with Joe Biden after the previous president, but the poet who spoke then, Amanda Gorman, she had a wonderful poem called The Hill We Climb. And guess what? A Florida school board has banned elementary students from reading Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. You know, it's in a book now, and they basically have banned it for little kids. I think middle school kids are able to read it. And I know that the publisher Penguin, as well as Gorman, are challenging this. She said, I'm gutted. Another tragedy that they are being remembered this week as of today, and today being Wednesday when we record, was the shooting of over 20 people, kids and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas. It's really just pouring out how messed up that response to that hostage taking scene was in that shooting. Um, and let's take a moment pretty much every day from now on the rest of our lives to remember all the kids and others who've been killed in these mass shootings. We need more gun control and more progressive governments. Okay, I think that'll be it for the opening banner. We got some great guests. Let me just give you a little heads up on a couple of things that are going on. Here in the 49th Ward, the Glenwood Sunday Market will resume next Sunday, the 4th of June, running till late October. It's 9 to 2 on Glenwood Avenue between Morse and Lunt. It's now called the Glenwood Alfresco area. That'll be starting next week. Also coming up on Father's Day weekend, I think that's around the 17th or so, the 30th annual Artists on the Wall is coming back to the neighborhood. And coming up on June 3rd, the Workers' Rights Board of Chicago Jobs with Justice is holding a hearing and an event, and we'll give you more on that because there's some labor issues going on at the Howard Brown Health Clinics around LGBT stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll fill you in on that. And we'll be right back. We're going to take a short musical break. We're going to play some, I imagine, Butterfield Blues Band, and we'll be back talking to the makers of this great new film about Chicago blues and the passing of the torch. Welcome back to more Live from the Heartland, and it really gives me a lot of pleasure to bring on two fellows who have been making a movie about the blues. It's called Born in Chicago. It's a soulful documentary film that chronicles the passing of the torch from the Chicago blues musicians to younger white kids from the suburbs. It's really beautiful. It's I got these two guys coming on to talk about it, John Anderson and Bob Sarles. I hope I pronounced that right.
You got it.
I watched the film this morning, and it reminded me. It's got these young fellows in there, whether it be Butterfield, whether it be Bloomfield, Charlie Musselwhite, et cetera, et cetera. It brought back a lot of memories. I first remember meeting Charlie Musselwhite in the Jazz Record Mart. I was doing a paper on the socialization of the Negro jazz musician off of a Downbeat article I'd read about reverse prejudice in jazz. And Charlie Musselwhite was there. And I remember Mike Bloomfield. We brought a couple of blues guys to Lake Forest College back in the day. And I used to go down to the Blue Flame at 39th and Drexel to see Paul Butterfield. So in the movie, you're making all these connections, all these people are emerging. It's really a wonderful flick. So without me talking anymore, I'm going to turn it over to John Anderson and Bob Sarles. Why don't you tell us how this movie came to be?
Well, thanks, Michael. In 2008, I shot a concert at Park West starring Chicago Blues Reunion. I shot it along with Tim Martin, the executive producer of the film. And CBR is Goldberg, Gravenitis, Siegel, and Mandel. Incredible show. It's available commercially as Chicago Blues Reunion Live, I think. And it was set to just be a concert film, but then as we did the interviews that were supposed to be part of the DVD extras, we realized, I already knew this, but it became even more clear that this story had to be told in a film, and we started shooting it. Barry Goldberg was my wingman, and we traveled all over the country gathering the interviews. And I think the screening you described was in 2010, okay? It was at the Front Row Cinema at Columbia College. That was where we showed the first cut. And at that point, Barry showed it to his buddy, Elliot Roberts, who showed it to his client, Neil Young, who showed it to Bob Dylan, and they all liked it. And that was enough incentive we needed to keep going out and shooting. And that was when we shot Hubert Sumlin and Steve Miller and so forth. And they all just filled in their angles on this amazing story of these tough white kids who took the blues to rock and roll. When the film was done, it was circulating. It played at South by Southwest and Lincoln Center and a couple other places. It played at the Vic in town. Wasn't sold. I had to move on to my film about Sam Lay called Sam Lay in Bluesland, and then to a film about Paul Butterfield called Horn from the Heart. And I kind of lost track of it there for a few years. And Bob, you want to pick it up from there?
Well, after John had left the project because of his schedule, the film went through a number of hands, and it evolved from the initial idea of doing a concert film, which had more background material built into it to give some context to what we were seeing. And over the years, as different people worked on it, it became more of a historical documentary. But everyone was working with the previous cuts as it was evolving into a new film, and it got to a point of diminishing returns, where it wasn't quite working. So the producers of the film found myself and my wife Christina. We had some heat at that moment from another film that we had done at the time, and they asked if we could fix.
Meaning trouble or good stuff?
Heat being good stuff. Yeah, I had a film that was getting some traction in the festival circuit, and so these guys found me, and I had mined the same story for a film that I'd made about Michael Bloomfield. I did a documentary about Michael Bloomfield, so I was well versed in the subject. And so, with the help of music journalist Joel Sullivan, who wrote an incredible script, he stepped back and told the whole story as an arc. So that became a blueprint for what Christina and I did, and we took John's original footage and recut it and added our own footage and did some new original research and came up with what's now the version of the film that we're releasing, which is more of a historical documentary.
I think I probably had confused it. I don't know if I did see the earlier version. What I was thinking of when one of you were on the show was the Porn from the Heart film.
Oh,
that was John's Paul Butterfield film.
Yeah, that's what I confused it with that.
That was one of the films that John, when he left this project, he went off and made a couple other films. He wasn't waiting around. He was making some really fine films that were all sort of mining we were harvesting the same mine for these stories to be told, these great stories that needed to be told.
Yeah, it's really it was beautiful to watch. I mean, just to see all that early footage of Muddy Waters. Not to mention you take each of these guys, Charlie Musselwhite, Elvin Bishop, Harvey Mandel, Nick Gravenitis, Barry Goldberg, all these guys, and you talk about where they came from, how they met each other, how they became involved in the music, and what they did with it. Why don't you give a kind of an overview of the film and what happens in it?
Well, it's basically a story of the passing of the torch from the originators of post-World War II electric blues, which came up from the South and it migrated to a couple different places, which we don't talk about because it's not the story we're telling. But Texas and New Orleans and California, there were also things going on. But the epicenter of this music was Chicago. And the pillars of this community were Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, and scores of other guys that were part of the scene as well, not only band leaders but the support musicians. And this was a Black cultural event that was happening in Chicago, but it wasn't known outside of the Black ghettos. And also, what happened is by the late 50s, early 60s. The music really wasn't being embraced by the next generation of Black kids. They were getting into soul music. They were getting into the music of James Brown and Otis Redding and Stax and Motown. That's what was turning them on. And this music, which was played by their parents and their grandparents, they considered that, you never want to listen to your parents' music. It was like when I was growing up listening to Frank Sinatra, I guess. Now I have an appreciation for it, but when I was a kid, it was the last thing I was going to listen to. So it took this group of middle-class white kids, mostly from the suburbs, who had migrated to Chicago themselves, attracted by the blues. Their excuse was to go to the University of Chicago, but they were really there to get immersed into the blues scene. And our film is the story about how the originators embraced this generation of white kids and how the torch and the music got passed on, and how it wasn't what we talk about today, cultural appropriation, because it wasn't a theft. It was a gift. Physically, it was a gift. Like, play it like this, They taught these guys how to play this music, and also there was a payback, because as soon as these white kids started getting traction in their careers by the mid '60s, and they were playing at good clubs that were paying well, and they were playing at the Fillmore, in the psychedelic ballrooms, they immediately turned it around and allowed these guys to have the opportunities. They told the promoters they were working for, you can get, we're covers of the originators and you should get the originators. And so there was a payback, and these guys had a last chapter in their career that they would have never imagined otherwise. So it's really a beautiful story about the passing of the torch.
Yeah, I really love, go ahead.
Well, and to see it, you can hear it in the music. You can certainly hear the way that that Muddy and Wolf and all the original guys from Chicago's music lives on in the stars of our film's music. And where it really hit home for both of us, and especially for me, was to see these guys together, to see Barry Goldberg show up into a room where we have the camera set up for Hubert Sumlin to sit down in, and those two interact with each other and love each other. You know, that is a big part of what the film is about too.
You know, I love that part in there where Bloomfield gets Bill Graham to start bringing in Muddy Waters and, you know, all these other guys. You know, right. It was, they did a great thing, you know, not only the music they made, but they were, you know, advocates for the whole scene. And I think you say it in the film that all of these prominent blues guys in Chicago did have a more comfortable older life than probably they would have had.
Graham would book them into his palaces while they were out there. And one thing that didn't make it into the version of the film is what the Chicago guys did. They did something called Fathers and Sons. Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember that. I didn't go to that concert, but I have a photograph or some photographs that Al Cost took at that event.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got the album.
I mean, it was, I've talked to lots of people who were there, and they say, you know, it was just an unbelievable vibe. And Marshall Chess said that those people there it was like all the people who had come to Big John's, that club on the north side that kind of broke the blues. All those people who came there over the years showed up at this one big venue. So it was happening all over the country, the way these white guys were paying the black guys back. And in fact, that record, Fathers and Sons, was Muddy's biggest record.
I think the last time I saw, well, no, I did see Butterfield 2 times after I used to go see him at the Blue Flame. One time was at the Fillmore, where we just kind of saw each other and kind of nodded at each other. And then the last time I saw him was pretty sad. It was at Biddy Mulligan's, and he was in an altered state. He was just kind of messed up, and I think he passed away not too long after that. Where are all these guys now? I mean, you did, one person I didn't mention was Steve Miller. You know, he used to be at Big John's. I remember hearing him play. I think he came out of Texas and went to school in Madison. But he's prominent in the film too.
Yeah, you know, Steve Miller, whatever happened to him, he's one of these obscure guys that just like went into, you know, obscurity. We never heard from him again.
We don't know.
Disappeared from the scene. No, I mean, he's still out there, you know. I think he lives in New York these days. And you know, he still does a tour. I know that not so much during the COVID shutdown, but you know, he's still active. And Elvin is still on the road, and Charlie's still on the road. They sometimes play together. You know, sadly, there's been a lot of attrition. A lot of these guys didn't make it. You know, they didn't make it. You know, Bloomfield didn't make it into his 40s, and Butter didn't make it out of his 40s. So, you know, a lot of these guys, they lived a tough life. But I wanted to double back about one of the things. I think one of the things that the younger generation learned from the older generation was a certain amount of just integrity in terms of how you live your life. And I think that is in their music, that their music has integrity, and how they conducted themselves was with great integrity. And that's why I think they felt an obligation to pay it back to the guys that they learned it from, you know?
Yeah.
And thinking about back to Steve Miller too, a story Corky told me was that they were all fighting for the job there after Butterfield left. And Miller, the Goldberg Miller band, was fighting against Siegel Schwall. And there was a friendly, healthy competition, which I think comes across in the film between the bands. But something that Steve did that was a little bit of dirty pool was when the Siegel Schwall band was set up for the rehearsal, Steve went behind Schwall's amp and cut a wire or did something that would make it so his guitar didn't work. I kid you not.
I'll never listen to him again.
I don't know who got the gig or if they fixed it in time, but, just a little, you can't fit everything into the movie.
On that thing about the younger black people at the time not wanting to listen to their parents' music and the blues, I was stranded in Gary during the blizzard of '67. And there were a number of us all on the floor. And one of the people there was Skip James, who was on his way to the University of Chicago Folk Festival. And I got him I said, hey, how about playing some music? So he starts to play, and some younger Black people, or mostly guys, started playing their boombox real loud to drown him out. I did go and talk to them. I said, this is a pretty famous old guy, and it worked out. But there was people weren't interested in that music anymore. And it's, the white kids picked it up, but the blues has had a resurgence, I think, right? I mean, there are blues festivals all over, and what's the state of it? What do you guys see out there?
I don't know so much of a resurgence. I think it's always stayed alive. I think there's always been people who have kept the flame alive. I mean, in San Francisco, we had a guy for years. He's still on the radio, Tom Mazzolini. He for decades he had the San Francisco Blues Festival. It wound up, in this century, it kind of died out, but it was the longest running blues festival for years. And other people pick up the flame. And carry it on. And I see it now in younger musicians. And I'm heartened by seeing a number of younger Black musicians breaking the blues too, which you didn't see for a number of years. But now you are seeing younger Black men and women embrace this music. And I don't think, I think its day is a popular music like jazz. I think it's past. But I don't think it's ever going to die. I think there's always going to be people who appreciate it and play it, and I don't think it'll ever die.
And you look at Charlie and Elvin, right? Musselwhite and Bishop. They're playing Ravinia this year, Michael. I mean,
let's go. Let's meet up there.
That would be fun. Well, I think we're trying to arrange a screening that times with their performance there.
Well, you mentioned the screening, and I know that you do have an event coming up. I think it's June 9th. Why don't you tell people about it? I think it's going to be at the Cultural Center.
That's right. It's part of the Chicago Blues Festival on Friday, June 9th at 1 o'clock at the Chicago Cultural Center, which has been refurbished, a beautiful 200-seat theater. It's free and open to the public, but they suggest reservations. So go to the Blues Festival's website and go through Eventbrite and just give them your name. And it's going to be a wonderful screening, and Bob is going to be there, and I'll be there, and we're going to be joined by Howlin' Wolf's daughters, Barbara and Betty. And Barry Goldberg will be there too, spending a few days with us. So it's going to be a great panel.
I wish I would be there too. I'm going to be in El Paso with basketball in the barrio, but I'll be with you in spirit. How about talking a little bit about other projects you might be working on or related projects? Where does this take you? I mean, this movie really is a great education piece. It's so moving. And I'm just wondering what you're working on now, and if as the movie, I assume it's going to take off a little bit, and how you plan to be involved with it.
Well, you hope it takes off. Making a movie. I tell people, like, people come to me.
That's why we're saying it. We're trying to make it.
People come to me all the time pitching ideas about music documentaries they want to make, and I always ask them, like, what's your goal? And if their goal is to make money, I quickly talk them out of it. But if their goal is to spend some money and get a film out because they have a story they want to tell, that's the reason to do it. And we hope that this film finds its audience. It's hitting all the TVOD stream at home platforms on August 1st. That's Google Play and YouTube and all that stuff that you can get your stuff online these days. It'll be available to download and rent. And we've been taking it around. We've been doing a lap on the film festival circuit to try to get the word out and get some word of mouth going on it. So we actually finished this film about two years ago, but because of COVID, its general release has been delayed because we didn't want to do the virtual film festival scene. We wanted to have people see it in person because it really is a crowd pleaser when you do get to see it with an audience. As for me personally, I've got a dozen irons in the fire. We'll see which one catches first. I feel a very strong obligation to finish a film that I've been working on for decades about my dear friend, my late friend Paul Krasner, one of the original Yippies and the publisher of The Realist, who led
one time.
Very interesting life, and I followed him around for a number of years. Sadly, he passed away just at the beginning of, or just before COVID. And but I'm hoping that I'll be able to put it together. And also there's other things I can't speak of, but I'm staying busy with other stuff.
For me, this was, the first of the three Chicago blues films I worked on. This was what led to the Sam Lay film and to the Paul Butterfield film, and now it's coming out last. I think there might be another film in there to be done on the Chicago blues. I'm thinking about that, and I'm finishing up a film that I'm doing about the Manhattan Transfer vocal group.
Well, I'm really honored to meet you guys. And one of the things as an older guy now, I try to do is when I talk to people, I ask them how they got involved, whether it's in their politics or their filmmaking, so that younger people might get a little inspiration. So in a short minute or so, why don't each of you tell us how you got into film and why you're in it and why you like it? How's that?
Can do. Take it, Bob. I'll follow.
Okay. Well, I was one of these filmmaking brats. In the early 70s, I was running around with a Super 8 camera. It started out with regular 8 and then Super 8. I got into the half-inch Portapac. And in those days, it's hard to imagine, it was only the real weirdos that were doing this stuff because it was expensive, it was clunky, it was a craft, and it wasn't as ubiquitous as today, where everybody's got the technology in their pocket. We were kind of weirdos, and I kind of followed that path through high school and into college, and studied filmmaking in college, and just decided that this was going to be my vocation. As a child of the '60s, I grew up on this music, and it's always been my passion. So I've been very fortunate in my career to combine my love for film with my love for music, and to be able to produce a number of music documentaries.
Right on.
Always loved music, always loved film, always told people I would try to do something with my life that combined them. And early in my career, MTV came along. I had and have a band called the Cleaning Ladies that were able to use all of my tools to make music videos, which put us on the map. And same thing. I've just continued to seek out projects in music where I could make films. And I've met so many great people, and it's been so far so good. And thanks for having us on.
I'm really honored to have you guys on, and I'm inspired, and I'm looking forward to running into you in person and hanging around a little bit and doing more talking. I told a lot of personal things, which I can't help myself. But on our way out, here's a picture of Muddy Waters and James Cotton, shot at the Fat Black Pussycat on Broadway, just above Diversey, in 1962, either in the spring or the fall. I don't know which. And I'm still looking for the negative, but I do have the original print. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. And once again, let's just tell everybody, the Chicago Cultural Center, Claudia Cassidy Theater, 1 p.m., Friday, June 9th, will be the showing of this film, Born in Chicago.
This will be the premiere of this version of the film. This is the first time this film has been shown in Chicago, so we're very excited about it.
Do you have any other showings lined up? I mean, have you hit the Music Box or places like that to get it as a feature?
Well, I keep pushing for it to be released as a feature. I don't know that the resources are there to make it happen, but we're immediately taking it to the New York Independent Film Festival a couple days after our Chicago screening. And I'm still waiting to hear from about a dozen other film festivals that we've been put it in our hat in the ring to see if we'll get it in. We're batting about 300, which is really good.
Not bad at all.
The film
it's like buying a lottery ticket trying to get these films into festivals.
Bob, you left out that we won Best of Fest at the Palm Springs International Film Festival, and we won Best Director at First Glance Philadelphia. And we were the only U.S. film nominated for the Circle Award at the DC Indie Fest. So momentum is building.
You're a hell of a group of guys. Thanks a lot, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
I'll be seeing you, yeah. Everybody else, stay tuned here for more Live from the Heartland. We're going to bring on Coya Paz, and we're going to talk about the Free Street Theater. We're back with more Live from the Heartland. And this segment of the Live from the Heartland show will be about theater. And I got to say, it's my favorite theater group, which is Free Street Theater. And it's because they're so good, not just because one of them, Coya Paz, is my daughter, but because they really are a special troupe. So good morning to you, Coya Paz and Katrina Dion.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's actually afternoon, but we do that all the time. We don't know. Sometimes this is on at night and CAN TV, sometimes anytime, doesn't matter. People are getting it.
What is time? A human construct.
Well, tell us a little bit about the history of Free Street Theater, how it came to be. I know they used to have a trailer with a stage back in the late 60s. You've been involved with it for a number of years now, probably both of you. And it is a wonderful group. So tell us about it. Give us a little rundown.
Katrina, do you want to talk about it? Katrina directed our 50-year documentary.
Yes, I did. I got to talk to alumni from all now 54 years of Free Street Theater, all about the different projects. Learned a lot. There's a whole 25-minute documentary to even get into that, if anyone wants to ever watch that. But in 1969, Patrick Henry, along with a collaborator, Perry Bear, I believe was his name, were coming together to look, kind of working with the city, right, to kind of think about how could theater be used as a tool to heal a divided city at the time. And what Patrick and Perry really did was look at the statistic of that over 90% of Chicagoans had reported to never have seen theater. And of course, predominantly, most of those folks were from the south and west sides of Chicago, as most of the theater infrastructure here is located in the wealthiest and whitest parts of our city. And so what they did, exactly what you were saying, Michael, was they got together what was to become the first racially integrated theater company of Black and white actors to come together and travel the city and present sort of joyful presentations of people being together on stage.
Well, that's pretty neat. And I got to say, you've created plays that are engender better community relations and people getting along together. It's kind of a little bit political. Let's just be honest. It's political theater, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we like to describe it, and obviously over 54 years, Free Street has changed a lot. It goes from this sort of soft but important at the time, mission of like, let's model racial unity and togetherness and take theater to communities that don't have access to professional theater. That's still a really important part of our mission. We prioritize work on the south and west side of the city, particularly Back of the Yards, McKinley Park, Gage Park, Brighton Park, kind of the Spanish-speaking South Side, but not exclusively Spanish-speaking. But what we really try to do now is think about how theater and performance can be partners in a social change effort. So we work closely with organizing partners who have something that they're trying to get done in the city, usually around environmental justice. That's a really key part of our mission these days. To think, how does storytelling, how does humanizing, how does a translational experience, so like sometimes environmental issues are really complicated. How can we make a play that helps audiences connect to them, understand them better, and then connect back to organizers?
Well, you spend a lot of time performing in the parks as well as at your headquarters over on Blackhawk, I believe.
Yeah.
And, you've talked about environmental justice, but how do you choose your topics and how do you evolve the actual production? What are the steps you go through? And after we do that, we'll talk more about your out there in the parks and how you do that and how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, Katrina has a show running right now, so we could talk about how that came to be, right?
Yeah, I think so. The show that I have running right now is called Wasted. And the birth of this show is really how a lot of our shows come to be, which was we were developing a different show that was called 50 and 50, where we performed in all 50 wards of the city in one day. And I was doing a tour of Auburn Gresham with some community leaders there to get a sense of where should we perform in your ward? What are the best places? What spaces do you want to activate? And as I was doing that with Carlos Nelson, he mentioned to me that the reason that there was so much garbage on the street was because the city waste workers were not only, when they would come through the neighborhood to take the garbage, they weren't just putting the garbage into the truck. They were taking the entire can and putting it into the truck so that they wouldn't have to stop in the neighborhood again. And there's a backlog for garbage cans in the city, which caused then for neighborhoods to not have access to something as simple as a garbage can to dispose of their waste, right? And then that bleeds into them being called, a dirty neighborhood or something like that. And so this seed birthed into what now has really been like a 3-year process of investigating who and what the city makes disposable. So that's all to say, when we're developing our shows, we do these community storytelling processes where we're gathering stories about the show, but oftentimes other stories, other issues come up in those processes. And we say, there's something there. There's actually a whole other play there that deserves to have its space and time. And so it's kind of this constant process of developing, listening, refining.
I'll give another example that what Katrina is talking about, that process is that in the fall of last year, so October 2022, we were working on a show we thought would be called Buried Seeds. And it was about the hidden stories of Chicago. I'm really personally, as a researcher, interested in the story of Dunning, which was a mental hospital on the northwest side of the city where they just dumped bodies in the backyard, up to 3 feet of bones sometimes. And that's a story a lot of Chicagoans don't know. So we were curious about what else are stories that people don't know. And we started holding community storytelling workshops. We invite people to share stories and thoughts on that theme. And through that conversation, we realized actually what we need to do is stay with this topic of environmental justice, because a lot of people don't know what's buried in back of the yards, don't know what's buried right underneath their houses and parks and how close they are to polluters. And that's just not information they have. So now the show is called There Is a Future. And it's essentially an environmental justice 101 in the parks, outdoors, super funny and joyful. And that's really how we tried to do things. Like Wasted uses house music and disco music to illustrate this issue. We think we're trying to talk about serious issues, but we're trying to make people feel empowered to be a part of change. And so we can't create things that are discouraging. We need to create things that connect them to change makers. We never believe that the play itself is social justice. It's a tactic in a larger strategy. And we're really clear about that. We don't think woo, good for us. We put on an important play. If the work is over, we think what makes a play useful is that it's really fun, it's really energizing, and it gets people motivated to stay in relationship with these issues.
Let me ask, who participates in the putting the play together, and who are your actors? Where do you find folks? Do they get paid? Is it volunteer, et cetera, et cetera?
We would never not pay somebody. About 40% of our work is working with young people. We think that, youth are a part of our city. Their voices are important. And we Katrina runs the youth program. Katrina's our current artistic director and I'm our strategic director. And we really treat them like artists because they are, they're making a show, they're putting on a good show. The other 60% or so of our work is with multi-generational artists. We run a program called the In-House Program, which is a residency for artists who might not otherwise be able to put shows on. And then the rest are drawn from community members, organizers, and artists who live in the neighborhoods where we're performing and that we serve. And, one of the things we say a lot is that formal theater training isn't important to us. The woman who has been hyping the church choir for 20 years is an amazing performer. She knows how to get the audience energized. So we're much more interested in people that will be relatable to our audiences and who have real things to say about the communities we live in. Because economic justice is a key part of our mission, we pay everybody that works with us a minimum of minimum wage. Art is a job, and often much more than that.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
There used to be a lot of volunteer stuff going on. Let me ask a little bit about inspirations, other theater groups that have influenced you. I know Coya knows that I'm already thinking about Uptown and Join Community Union and the Join Theater that my sister put together. And I know you two have talked about it, but there are other groups too. I mean, whether it's the San Francisco Mime Troupe, but they're just conscious political people involved in theater and trying to move people emotionally, intellectually to a better place. What do you got? What influenced the two of you?
For me, it's so Coya was also, I went to the theater school at DePaul, where Coya was also my professor. So a lot of my aesthetics have been, I think, really grounded in Coya's practice and one of our collaborator, Ricardo Gamboa's practices. I've learned a lot from those folks. I would also say because Ricky as well has trained with people like the neo-futurists or, things like viewpoints or tectonic, this way of like the sort of grassroots way of creating theater and really like looking at all of the abundance of tools we have, even if all we have is like tape and a piece of paper. And so I think in that way, like there's theater that's inspiring, but also just the way that protest, right? Like the aesthetics of protest, the sort of the early days, I interviewed you, Michael, as a part of a show back in 2016.
I've been trying to remember how that all, I remember seeing the show and I guess I got interviewed because the show had Rising Up Angry in it.
Yeah, we interviewed you and there was a little monologue where our student Rivka played you for about 5 minutes. And, we interviewed Lifted Voices at the time, which does a lot of radical militant work of things like Dion's so really looking at also the aesthetics of that kind of performance that also erupts in activism, right? So I would say that also is really something that we utilized in the work too.
I think that when we think about influences, the reality is that when I was in college, I didn't study or see a lot of the companies that you mentioned, so obviously I'm aware of San Francisco Mime Troupe because your sister, my aunt, was involved in it. So I know that these things happen, but I didn't, I think a lot of the challenge for people who are interested in making work that has an aesthetic that speaks to a divested or underrepresented community is that you just don't often get a chance to see what's possible. And so a lot of times I think we feel like we're making it up from scratch, like what would be cool? What's something that someone's grandma would like? What is happening in this music video? Like Katrina does a lot with pop culture of thinking about what are people going to be able to connect to and how can we riff on that? And I think that's what's great about theater is that it's always in a process of reinvention, as is activism, that we have to always think about like what's resonant right now, not in a way that we're forgetting our history, our roots, because one of the problems that we find, and this is something that we're trying to discourage in our work, is like sometimes people recognize a problem and they're very quick to jump to a solution. Like, I'm going to start an organization that does X, or, oh my gosh, gun violence in the city is so horrible. What can we do? Without recognizing that there are activists and organizers who are deeply committed to working on that may not be celebrated or uplifted. And so that's a really important part of our work is make sure people understand that for every challenge in our city, there's already somebody who has been so impacted by that challenge that they're working to change it. And what they need is support, not replication.
That's good. Both of those, both your comments are good. I'm having a good time with this interview. One of the things that is interesting is that we love our city, we love our government sometimes, and that would include the Park District. They've done some great things and some not so good things. You have a really good relationship, I think, with the Chicago Park District, because the last time I saw you all perform was in Harrison Park a couple summers ago, maybe 3 or 4. I can look it up, but talk a little bit about how that relationship with the Park District either came to be originally, how it's evolved, and just share it, because I think it's important for people to know that there are aspects of our city government, municipal government that are helping to bring about more social, political, economic change.
Yeah, I mean, we're great partners with the Chicago Park District. We say they're our BFFs. We love them. We're so grateful for them. And they work really hard. The Park District is the largest producer of theatrical events in the city. As they create this, they have this Night Out in the Parks program that actually runs through the fall, that is all about like making theater in parks all across the city. We have a very large, it might be the largest park district in the country. And so they're producing a lot of work. We cannot take credit for the relationship with the parks. Free Street's been around for 54 years. Our predecessors were the ones who established, we were the first artist in residence for the Chicago Park District at Pulaski Park. They basically founded that project, like, hey, you got some space, can we have it? They were performing out of an old funeral home in Cabrini Green before that. This was back in the 80s. And of course, when we have always performed in public spaces every summer, the only summer we haven't performed in a public space was 2020. And what we did instead is open a free 24-hour pantry out of our back of the yard space, because we thought our community needed food and diapers and formula more than they needed a socially distanced show.
Are you now in the back of the yards and not over on Blackhawk?
We got 2 locations.
2 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're growing, you're expanding.
Yeah, and we want to buy a building. So if you have any rich people listening to the show who are motivated and excited, we currently rent in back of the yards, but we would really like to put down more roots. We've been there for about 6 years.
Well, you just can call me Moneybags and I'll see what I can pull off. But
all right, Moneybags.
I will spread the word.
You want a building. So,
Do you ever think about taking these productions, maybe involving them even more and presenting them in theaters, or traveling a little bit on the road, that kind of thing? I'm always pushing for, what else can we do?
We think about touring all the time, especially, whenever we have the opportunity. Me and Coya have been around the state of Illinois to facilitate different conversations in towns as small as Toulon, which is, I think, less than 1,000 people in the county. And everywhere we go and we talk about our work, people always come and tell us more stories about their community, And so what we would love to do is be able to tour, not only more of Illinois, but more of the country, and use it as a model to be able to present stories about Chicago, yes, but also use it to start infusing our work with the stories of how these issues are affecting the country at large and many different people. So that's definitely, we were literally going to tour a show to Canada, to a water protector conference. We were going to tour a show Parched about water justice in October of 2020. So of course that didn't happen. So it's something that we definitely were revving up for and then weren't able to do. So now we think we're in the space, I think, again, where we're starting to think a lot more about touring again.
Sorry, I think like every theater company, we were heavily impacted by COVID. Theater is a live art. And so we're still in that mode of, Wasted is our first like full big audience run. We did a show last year called 57 Blocks that Katrina directed, that was on a bus that traveled up and down Ashland, but that could only have like 10, 12 people in the bus. So this is the first time we're back to doing shows for large amounts of people. And we do have a for hire arm where we do facilitated custom design dialogues for people all over the country who are looking for more effective and joyful ways to have a difficult conversation. And we're really good at that. If we can talk to people about like, hey, have you heard about chromium-6? It's in your water and the EPA doesn't care. We can also talk about, yeah, there you go. What's going on? Why is your staff having such a hard time communicating around a check-in or things like that? We do strategic planning. So, we believe that theater is useful. It's useful in a social justice movement. It's useful to change individual lives. It's useful as a practice to help other people think about how they want to be together in the world.
How about giving us what's coming up? What do you have planned for the summer? Some dates or places that people should be aware of? You're both smiling. What's going on?
So Wasted just closed. And our next show is There Is a Future, Tenemos un Futuro, which is a bilingual free show touring.
Say that again real slowly.
There is a future, or en español, Tenemos un Futuro, which is a bilingual show about environmental justice. And it will tour the parks. It's super fun and funny and promise. And we also have a 3-week youth intensive. So if there are young people interested in getting involved in theater, it's free. And we will be doing drag loteria events throughout the summer. We have a partnership with Star Farm, which is an urban garden, and with Plant Chicago, which does sustainability and a circular economy work. So we do outdoor summer events all summer. Check our website.
What is the website?
freestreet.org.
freestreet.org.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask both of you what I'm starting to do this as an old guy. Whether in my class I teach it to Paul or on the radio show, I like people to talk a little bit about how they got involved, not only in this case in theater, but in being conscious political people, because I think we need examples of others who have chosen these paths and traveled these roads and pathways for younger people coming up. I don't know if we have a lot of young people listening to the show, but over the years they'll watch it because, just keep getting clicks on YouTube. So give me a little bit about each of you, where you came from, how you got into it, and what moved you along the way.
Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go
Yeah,
first?
why don't you go first? Yeah.
Okay. So I think, obviously I'm one of your children. You're one of my parents. So something you said a lot when we were growing up, or always, you still say this, do good in the world because the world needs all that you do. My biological parents were never married, and I don't want any stories about how you met, but it did produce a love child, which was me. And I was raised by a lot of different parents in different configurations, all of whom had a deep commitment to social justice. I think that's a connecting thread. So there's never been a time in my life when I wasn't sort of thinking about how to have a relationship between arts and social justice. I'm also a Quaker, and I know it's unfashionable to talk about religion sometimes, but Quakers believe that all people are equal. And so I've always had this deep, heartfelt commitment to how can my work better serve the people in my community? And so I think that, and I joke a lot. I wish I was an environmental scientist and not a theater maker, but I'm a theater maker. And so I'm doing the best I can to make change in that modality.
Well, you're doing good, Coya. Keep it up.
Thank you.
How about you, Katrina?
Yeah. So, I think similarly, my parents had a big influence. My dad is a political science professor, and my mom has done a lot of environmental economics work as well. So I was a child at the dinner table where we talked about all that stuff. My dad would talk to me a lot about his research at the time growing up, which had a lot to do with the KKK in Indiana in particular. So I was involved in a lot of conversations about the way that racism was in our country and was still thriving in our country, right? And so that wasn't a conversation I was left out of. And then I was also really fortunate to be really empowered as a young person through a program I did. Grew up in Iowa City, Iowa. I did a program called Youth Advisory Panel, which was all about peer-to-peer sexual health education, and even talking to anywhere from 12 to 18-year-olds about sexual health. And so that was, I think, really powerful for me to be trusted with this information and to be able to be a leader with this information. I think that's the reason why I was called to work with the youth ensemble, because that was a program that really showed me that I could be a teacher and an owner of knowledge, and I could present it in ways that were helpful to my community. And so I love to bring that into the youth ensemble itself. So I feel like those were all things that sort of helped pave the way for me to become more radicalized in this way, and excited to think about how I could bring those conversations at the dinner table to a place like the theater. That, and then just making up dances in my living room constantly as a young person, and living room dance culture. Basically now I just get to make dances all the time and make theater all the time, except the living rooms look a little different.
Well, the two of you are great examples for other people to follow. And I really do appreciate that you both came on. I know you're very busy. I'm sorry people are not going to get to see Wasted, which raises a question. Do you videotape these, and do you ever think about putting them up on YouTube?
Yeah, so actually we do have some of our work on our Vimeo channel, where you can check out that documentary I mentioned, as well as one of our productions, Still Here, which Coya directed, and Parched, which I worked on. Wasted, we're actually filming it this week. So we should, within the next few months, have a version of that available to watch, as well as we recorded 57 blocks last year, which is still in post-production. That was a little bit more complicated.
Well, I'm going to look forward to watching your next production, and I'll come, I promise. And I really appreciate you both coming on today. This was a good segment, and it'll be on with the whole show, as well as it'll be an individual interview that people can access at youtube.com/Heartland Media. So keep up the good work, young sisters. Do good in the world. The world needs all you good you do. Okay, we want to thank everybody who've been tuning in to Live from the Heartland today. We want to thank all of our guests, not only Katrina and Coya, but also our first guests, which were John Anderson Bob Sarles. They talked about the Born in Chicago movie. There's a lot to do out there in the world to make it a better place. So everyone, have a great week. We'll be back next week. We've got Barry Goldberg out of the Butterfield Blues Band coming on. And I want to thank everybody who has made this show possible. That includes Hal James, our engineer, as well as Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, and Lynn Orman. And I want to, Coya was talking about Quakers and peaceful things. So I want to encourage everyone to do what athletes are supposed to do. Do sports, not war. So there. I got these bumper stickers. If you need them, let me know. Okay, that's it for today's Live from the Heartland. Everyone have a great week. Do good. We'll see you next week.